Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. So, a while ago, in April in fact, at the end of April, I made a video called Tell Me What You Think, Are Male Characters More Relatable? And in that video I spoke about how, growing up, and even now, I'm usually more drawn straight away to male characters and their perspectives, apart from in certain circumstances, but usually my process towards having favourite female characters, and I do have many, a lot of that, it's a lot more effort because I feel like the source material itself doesn't give you the dimensions that it gives the male characters necessarily. So a lot of the time you create these sort of patchwork female characters, so you'll develop these likings for female characters, sometimes out of spite for the sexist narrative or the sexist portrayal. I certainly do that. Or sometimes it's because you identify with them for a certain trait. Another reason might be that you enjoy their potential and what they stand for. And I find a lot of the time in my head I build the character up into maybe something they're not on screen. And I kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, or I give them that potential in my own imagination or in fan fiction, that sort of thing. So that's the video, and you can watch that up in the description box. So, I asked you what you thought, and I asked you to tell me in the comment section, so you did. So I'm going to read out some of the comments we got, and yeah, just discuss this subject a little bit more, because it's something that I find isn't talked about that much in feminism, or you don't have to be a feminist to watch this, but obviously my perspective when I look at media and dissect media is a feminist perspective, since I'm a feminist. But it's very interesting. I think a lot of us feel a bit embarrassed and uncomfortable about admitting this, but yeah, it's certainly a widespread phenomenon. So let's have a look. Fallen Angel Productions says, I understand completely. A lot of female characters come off almost stereotypical and it gets rather annoying, and that in turn makes me not like them or relate to them. See, this is a really good point. This is the sort of thing that I feel as well. I feel like it really notices if a female character is written by a writer who perhaps isn't that great at writing women. I won't just say male writers, because there are some male writers that can write women really well, but there are certain male writers, do I bring the names in? No, I'm not going to, who really aren't good at writing female characters that seem real, you know? So they'll write like the stereotype characters. So the women will fall into sort of archetypes, you know, like the traditional female archetypes. So you'll have like the Black Widow, like evil, like sort of man-eating vampy woman, and then you'll have like the little waify woman, like the manic pixie dream girl. You'll have the girl next door girlfriend character. There are so many of these types of women, and you see them repeated in everything, but when you sort of delve deeper into their characters, a lot of the time in the shows there just is nothing more than that stereotype. Sometimes it can be subverted really interestingly, so sometimes a show will actually use one of these like stereotypes or these archetypes and actually use it to force us to look more at that character and to see beyond that. So in some instances it can work really well, but I totally get what you mean. Like, it feels so frustrating when a writer creates a feminist character. They say it's a feminist character, a strong female character, and then you come to see it and actually it's just, I'm a perfect sexy woman who fires guns and I'm sassy, but I don't actually do anything particularly feministy. I'm just like a bit of a male fantasy. Usually she's a white woman, she's an action heroine, she's always conventionally attractive, of course. She's supposed to be strong because she can take on the men physically, but she doesn't actually have much personality beyond that character, and that can be really frustrating. Joe Carter says, may or may not be relevant, I'm sure it is, Joe, but I was watching the TV show Breaking Bad recently, and the main male character, who becomes a drug dealer and does some horrific things, is seen as much more likeable than his female wife, who quite rightly opposes his bad lifestyle. She is seen as a bitch and unlikable, even though she reacts in a reasonable and realistic way. So I think male characters must be written more likeable than female characters, even if the male is far more toxic. Yeah, you bring up a really good point here. I think it's two things. I think that you're right, that men are given that depth, and we get to see more of their motivations. We're encouraged to feel more sympathy for them. Actually, I don't know if we're encouraged to feel more sympathy for them, or if that just happens because they get more point of view stuff. Like, we understand where they're coming from, so we naturally feel more sympathy. I think that's a really good point, and women sometimes aren't afforded that. But I also think it can be to do with, like, the sexism in society. I think that society in general can be pretty unforgiving to women. I mean, it does depend on the circumstance. I think that women in society are still called bitches for having their own opinions and calling things out, and they're seen as unreasonable in society sometimes when they have these opinions. whereas their male counterparts, or just as men in society, are able to have those opinions on politics or just the way that they're treated, and that's seen as, oh, good for them. And when the man does it, it's almost expected, and when the woman does it, like, it can really come back at you. Like, I've been called a bitch before, when I've been very, very polite in, you know, pointing out my own boundaries and things like that. So I think it's a culture thing as well. I think it's both of those things. Now, I don't watch Breaking Bad, so I don't know the exact context of this, but you have 53, I don't know if it's likes or dislikes or whatever, because for some reason you can't see that in my comment section. But yeah, 53 people have a lot to say about this. Well, this is interesting. Okay, Tony DeMeo, who's answered you, has said, everyone involved in the making of this show was completely surprised that people hated Skylar. I'm assuming that's the wife. In their minds, she was doing what she had to do to protect her family. Only a misogynist could hate her and love Walter, who murdered people and did put his family in danger. I'm now relating this to other shows that I watch. Now, sorry, I don't mean to bring this to Emmerdale. If you watch my channel, you'll know I've developed recently a real obsession with Emmerdale. Like, it's my thing. 7 p.m. on a weekday night and 8 p.m. on a Thursday as well. That's my Emmerdale time. It's sacred to me. But the same things I see happening in all sorts of fandoms, but let's just use Emmerdale for example. So I've spoken a lot about a certain situation in the soap where it's pretty biphobic storylines happening. But there's a female character that's sort of been written to break up the LGBT couple, and so fans really hate on her in a really sexist way sometimes. I mean, they are right to hate on the way she's been written and the way the storyline is and the way it's been framed, because it is really biphobic and actually kind of sexist. But I feel like she's become a symbol of that, of their discontent, and she's getting a lot of the flack as a character rather than, you know, taking a step back and looking at what the show's doing wrong with their representation. But there are characters in Emmerdale, so one of my favourite characters in Emmerdale, I've got two, the couple I support. I mean, one of them has accidentally killed someone. What else has he done? He's threatened people, he's blackmailed people. He's done some really bad stuff. Like, I still love him as a character. Like, in British soap's different, okay? In British soap, you'd be hard-pressed to find a character that wasn't some sort of murderer or something. And then the other guy in the relationship who's considered to be the good one, and he's my son, Aaron Dingle. If you watch Emmerdale, you know what I mean. I mean, he's pretty, like, he can be pretty violent. Like, he's gone to prison for GBH before. So he's not squeaky clean either. And people still love these characters despite their flaws, which isn't a bad thing. I think in fiction you can explore, like, these darker, dangerous characters that maybe, like, maybe you can be more forgiving in fiction, because in real life, obviously, it is more black and white. Like, if someone does something really awful like that, you don't really sit there and think, oh, let's think about why they did it and how we can still love them. But I think in fiction, it's really interesting to get into minds. That's the point of fiction, isn't it? So I don't understand people who act like, oh, you can't like problematic characters. This is totally not what we're talking about here. But it's like, it's fiction, that's where you explore that kind of thing. It's fascinating, like, in a psychology perspective. But then you have the female characters, like, well, this female character in particular that people dislike because the way she's been written into this storyline. Like, she said a couple of things which are a bit biphobic, and yeah, she's acted in a bit of a shitty way, but she is absolutely, like, hated. There's been a campaign to get her out of the show. Like, her name's Rebecca, and the hashtag is #Brexit. It happened around the Brexit thing. And it's just so harsh. Like, there are people who genuinely are arguing, like, she's this irredeemable, awful character, and, like, I understand from, like, the perspective of, like, the show's writing, like, I mean, they didn't give the girl a chance. I personally like the character for her potential. That's another example of a female character that maybe wasn't given a good start by the show, but I feel like I like, because I'm not gonna turn against her for bad writing, you know? Like, I want to look deeper, and I really like the actor. But yeah, the way people have reacted to her has been, in some cases, quite surprising and quite shocking and scary, because, you know, some people are like, oh, she's evil, she's irredeemable, get her out of the show, she's a terrible person. Like, people genuinely are trying to argue that this young woman is, like, as bad as people who have, like, committed GBH and almost murdered people. That's obviously not true. That kind of sounds like what you're describing here, to be honest. I've just thought of another example as well. Do you remember in Sherlock? I used to be a Sherlock fan back in the day. Not anymore, my friends, not anymore. But there was a character called Sally Donovan in Sherlock, and I actually made a video ages ago when I was, like, quite new to YouTube about why you shouldn't hate on Sally Donovan. I mean, obviously you can hate on any character you want, but people really hated this character. I mean, BBC Sherlock is written to be an asshole. I mean, he is like interesting as a character and quite endearing and vulnerable in places, but he is an asshole. He's quite rude to people, you know? I don't know how it could be perceived in any other way. I mean, yes, like, we might like him as a viewer. That's debatable depending on, like, what episode or series you're on. but like, you might be fond of him as a character, but he is an arsehole. He acts like an arsehole. So Sally Donovan was like a police detective. She worked in the police. She's a woman of colour as well. So I couldn't help but wonder if that had something to do with it. But she used to call him out on his bullshit. She really didn't like this character, and people hated her because she called him out. When if you actually look at the situation, if you're a police officer or a detective and you've got Sherlock Holmes, this rude arsehole, just like running all over your crime scenes and insulting everyone's intelligence, you're not gonna like them. But people absolutely hated her. I don't know if people still hate her. She kind of isn't in the show anymore, I don't think, which is a shame. But I mean, good for her to get out of that show, because the show wasn't good for her. But sad, because, you know, I liked Sally. But that's another example I can think of. So it sounds kind of like that. Yantia, sorry if I've pronounced that wrong, says, many strong, complex, unstereotypical female characters read like a political statement, which makes them two-dimensional again. They become allegories for female awesomeness, which can be inspiring but not relatable or very interesting. Stereotypes can be somewhat relatable, but it makes for flat characters. Male characters don't have the same catch-22, it seems. They can just be a character, and their gender doesn't have to be a meaningful part of what they represent. I think you've really, really hit the nail on the head here, because it's like, on the surface, it's like that thing I was saying before. On the surface, you have a female character who's like all powerful and awesome, and it's like, yay, look how progressive we are, look at our amazing strong female character. But actually, it's at the expense of her not being able to show those human traits and just be a character. And sometimes I think it's because there are still so few female characters and things. Like, that wouldn't be such an issue in a show where there were lots of female characters, because then you could have different types of female characters. But so often, this sort of character that you're talking about, like, will be the only one in a group full of men. Like, for example, let's say Black Widow in the Avengers. I mean, they've still only got, like, Scarlet Witch and Black Widow, and they are quite different characters, but still, I think Natasha, that's Black Widow, really suffered from this early on. Like, she has to be all things. Like, she has to represent all women because she's the only female character there. Whereas the rest of the guys around her, like all the other superheroes, they can have their different traits and their flaws, and they didn't have to represent all men everywhere. So one of the responses to Yantia's comment is by Willie the Male Boy 2. And basically it quotes some of your response and then says, writing from the feminist perspective will do that for you. It's ultimately self-defeating. Now the thing is, I disagree with that, Willie the Male Boy too, because that's not feminist writing. To write your female character as all-powerful and, oh, she's awesome, she's great, that's not feminist writing. That's not the feminist perspective. Like, the feminist perspective and feminist writing, and what I would regard as a strong female character, is a realistic female character. So, like, for example, Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones. I have my issues with Game of Thrones, I will say that, but Cersei Lannister is an unlikable character who I also happen to like for some reason, but I know she's unlikable. She's a bad person. She is, in my opinion, often a stronger character in Game of Thrones than Daenerys Targaryen, who is a bigger character and supposed to be a heroic character. I feel like sometimes Dany can even suffer from this, because sometimes it's so much about, oh, she's the magical dragon queen and she's so cool, that she doesn't get as much time for characterisation as some of the other characters do. So you have, like, Game of Thrones is an interesting one from a feminist perspective, because yeah, there are some issues with it, but actually, like, I think that it does a really good job of showing different types of women. There are lots of different types of women in that show, and I don't know, that draws me to it. And I know Game of Thrones has a lot of female fans, and I think it's because of that. I think that there are lots of different interesting female perspectives in that story, and it's not just like, oh, well, here's the one female character you can relate to that represents everything. Like, there are different types of female characters. You've got the Cerseis, and you've got the Sansas, you've got the Aryas, you've got the Briennes, you've got the Marjories, you've just got so many characters. Like, I would argue that, like, the feminist perspective doesn't mean making the female character a political statement. I think that the aim of, like, feminist writing should be, like, when you're writing a female character, you shouldn't be thinking, oh, how do I make this character feminist? Like, that's ridiculous. You need to just be thinking, how can I make this character real and human, and how can I really get into her head and make her motivations seem real? And then that in turn makes it a feminist character, even if the character themselves doesn't have to be like a feminist character that feminists would approve of if she was a real person, but people will approve of her writing on the whole, I think, from the feminist community, like, judging by, like, the community I'm part of. But the character will be regarded as sort of like a feminist or successful female character if she comes across as real. It doesn't have to be a good character. Denton XV says, now XV, I know V is 5, I think X might be 10. So is that 15? Denton 15 in Roman numerals? I should know that because of, like, history and all that kind of thing, and the kings and queens. I'm male, but growing up I always personally identified more with female characters than male, and I still do, really. Whenever I have to think of a new character for a story, it's more often than not that a female character comes first. That's really interesting to me because I often hear men who are writers talking about, you know, they often write a lot more male characters and they're often drawn more to the male experience. Like, I feel like that's quite unusual. Would you say that's quite unusual? Sorry, you can't like respond straight away. But yeah, that strikes me as quite unusual. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant and interesting. Maybe do you have like lots of female friends or female relatives or something like that? And what inspires you to go straight to the female characters, or is it just something inside you just don't know, you just feel drawn to them? I'd be really interested to know about that. Mal Nope says, I think a lot of likeable female characters have to be more extraordinary than real women like Arya or Katniss. Male characters, I find, are allowed to have more range and can be relatable even when it's unremarkable. Oh yeah, definitely. And I think that maybe it's an issue with the studios, because you often hear, don't you, rumours about, like, in film and things, like in Hollywood, you hear about the studios, like, blocking certain things, like, they don't really think that female-led stuff will sell, and even that's just, like, white cis women. And I think that maybe in order to get this stuff through, I think the creators end up thinking, oh, right, okay, we've got to sell it, we've got to sell this amazing, fantastic female character, we've got to make her amazing, we've got to make her appeal to everyone so the merchandise will sell. When really, I think they miss the fact that they'll actually create a more successful female character if they just go for a female character that is real. And again, more than one female character can help that, because you can share those different perspectives. You don't have to have that one character which has to embody them all and relate to all women. A comment here from Rachel Ray. So I'm not going to read all your comment out here, Rachel, but there's a certain part of your comment which I wanted to talk about here. So you said, I find a lot of things have the woman be dependent on the male. In the Twilight books, Bella spent the whole year sitting being depressed, as if Edward was her only motivation for life. Yes, she loves him, and yes, Edward went through this too, but I've always felt like she was always dependent on him. Yes, I found this as well, reading young adult fiction when I was younger. So much of the time, like, even the books that are female-led and that do have a female lead, it's still concerned around the male character, and the male character will drive the action, and the female character is sort of in awe of him, even though she's the lead character. Like, she should be the one going out there and doing things, like in other books, like in Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, all those sorts of books. Like, the main male character, like, goes out and does stuff, whereas so many times, like, it's not true of all young adult fiction, but so many times when I was growing up, I remember going to the library and picking up these new, like, books from the library and getting home and reading them, and so often it was just that the female character just, like you said, just sat around and did nothing until the boy came into her life. I also think that maybe a lot of us are a bit sick of those sort of love stories, and sometimes maybe that makes us a bit harsh on female characters on TV that are quite, loving and that sort of thing. I don't know. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I don't know if some of it's a pushback from women. I don't know if some of it's to do with we spent all our lives just reading books where it's about romance, all our literature's about romance and that's it and nothing else. And now if we see that on screen reflected with a female character, like, is it internalised misogyny that makes people dislike that? Or is it just the pushback? Is it just, I've had enough of it, I want something else? Hallie Sutton says, I agree with you actually that it's because A, men write female characters and therefore know how to make them real while fitting women into stereotype, and B, because we're taught growing up how to understand men through the texts we're given and our lessons. I mean, our coming-of-age stories in grade school and understanding growing up was usually done through male narrative, but I also think that as a feminist I am a little hard on female characters. With male characters I like them, but I explain away their behaviours with, well, he is a man, they do fuck up, of course he wouldn't get it, etc. But with women characters, I expect so much more. I fully believe feminism is that women can do anything they want, yes, but I mean out of a character. I want writers to do better. I want my female characters to be a better representation of women, and so when they are lacklustre and clearly stock characters, or they do something very cliché and easy writing, I become disenchanted quickly. I have very few female characters I love, without having to go further in my head with them, and I get disappointed easily when their storylines become typical. Not to mention main roles in shows and movies are meant to be the relatable roles, and often those are the men's roles, and often supporting characters are very cliché and predictable, and thus falling out of love with supporting women's roles, because they are written, often, purely to benefit the storyline of the main character, thus making the main character more relatable and likeable, and leaving the side character be tossed around between dislike and like, depending on what the show writers needed from that character for the week. Am I harsher on female characters? I think that sometimes I am. I think that's a good point. I do think I'm harder on female characters. I think maybe I expect more from them. I think that being a feminist, it matters to me so much that women are well represented on screen. And like I said, that doesn't necessarily mean having to be good characters, like good morally. But it matters to me that female characters are real, and maybe that makes me more critical of them on screen. I think that's definitely true. And sometimes I might let things slide with male characters because I'm not paying that extra attention to that. And also your point about how most main characters are men in films right now is a really good one, because I think in most films, like, no matter what the gender of the main character is, like, usually the film will centre around that main character. And the other characters will exist to further their story. I mean, that's unavoidable. I think that's how stories are built, usually. But because it's usually a male character that is the main character, we get this trend of the female characters being the supporting side characters, and so often anyway, like even in these male-led films, they're only given the opportunity to be that love interest, and then they're tossed aside, like you said. The amount of films I've seen where the only female character in the whole film, like, that has any sort of, like, vague character that you're supposed to remember, has been a love interest who really has nothing to say for herself and has nothing to contribute to the story other than, you know, sleeping with the guy and raising his status because she's a gorgeous girl and she's like a prize for him in the end. It's like the writer just thought, right, how can we complete this guy? Like, we'll give him a really hot girl. It's so frustrating. And actually, I think this is sort of what a lot of people critique. Like, this is not a video about Anita Sarkeesian, okay? I'm not talking about opinions on her in this video, but a lot of people have criticised her in her tropes versus women, like, video game series that she did, for calling out, like, these sexualised women. And I kind of get what she means. I think people are misinterpreting what she's saying. I don't think people are saying there's a problem with women being that character, like, oh, I'm the sexy character that's like the girlfriend of the main character. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because, you know, you do have to go with who the main character is, and in some films that's going to be a guy, and he's going to be a straight guy, and there's going to be a love interest. But the problem is when they are purely that, like, they're purely, like, you can see in these films that these characters, everything, their dialogue, the way they're dressed, everything is just to be sort of like, wow, look at the status of this guy, look at the girl he's got. I mean, think about the Bond girls, that's a really good example. Some of them are pretty well characterised, but a lot of the time they're just there to be like eye candy, and it's so frustrating because that's an interesting perspective. Like, I would have thought that, like, the Bond, I mean, in the newer films they do go into this more, like, for example, Vesper in Casino Royale is kind of slightly better than the usual Bond girl thing. But that's such an interesting perspective. Like, you would think, like, the lives these women have lived that lead them to this, but it's never delved into, and it's frustrating, and it is sexist the way they're portrayed, and it's really annoying as a female viewer. Joanna Anuhia Olofsson, I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong, said, I often find it difficult to relate to female characters because they're so sexualised. That just isn't a part of my identity, nor how I view myself. I'm pretty much only comfortable being sexualised when I'm about to actually have sex. I agree with you, Joanna. Like, it's not that I have an issue with female characters that are sexual, but there's a difference between being a sexual female character and being, you know, over-sexualised and becoming an object. Like, there's a big difference between that, and I think sometimes in these discussions people don't understand the difference. Like, they don't understand the difference between the objectification of a character and a character who is just sexy as a part of their persona and is sexy along with having a character. Like, so often female characters have to be sexy, and I think it might be to do with Hollywood again. I think it might be to do with, like, the big people high up thinking, oh, what will sell? Like, have, like, all the main characters and things, like even the new female-led films, the main character is always very attractive. I'm not saying particularly sexualised, I know this isn't exactly your point, but they always have to be very attractive to the male gaze, whereas I feel like a lot more male heroes and male characters don't have to be that attractive. Like, they're not thinking, oh, you know, we have to make these male characters gorgeous for the female audience, for the straight female audience out there. They're not thinking that. Yet when there are female lead characters, and even when the aim is supposed to be, like, this is a role model for women, like, she still has to be sexually attractive to lots of the men out there. Like, it's like she can't not be. Also, it does feel really uncomfortable to constantly see women sexualised. Like, it really does. It's a weird thing to experience, I think, when you're watching women get objectified, because it makes you feel objectified. It makes you feel like, oh, okay, is that how some men are perceiving me? Am I just an object wandering around that they're sort of like gazing at and like not listening to a word I say? Am I that irrelevant? Like, are women that irrelevant? That can be depressing sometimes. Zilk says, I get what you mean, Claudia, and I've got to tell you, I'm also a little confused. I experience the same thing with these female characters. I try to love them and appreciate them for what they are, but there is indeed a lot of effort that goes into it. I guess I'm harder on female characters than on male characters. It's almost like I'm thinking, oh, that male character is an excuse for doing something stupid or bad because he's male. Females do not have an excuse. They should know better. Why? I don't know. 3 possible causes. There may be more. 1, maybe this is because I'm a female myself, so I'm harder on myself, therefore I'm also harder on people with whom I identify myself with as far as gender goes. 2, maybe this could be a reflection of society and how much pressure there is being put on females to be perfect. And 3, maybe most female characters are indeed badly written. I do often get frustrated with this. There's a few characters who just give me a headache because of their unrealistic behaviour. For example, Dany from Game of Thrones, especially in Season 6. Speaking of Game of Thrones, my favourite character is Cersei, although instinctively it's very hard to love her at times. Zilk also adds that she's not a native English speaker. Go easy on your grammar's perfect. I can't believe English isn't your native language, it's amazing. I'm interested in one of the early things you said actually, which is that you're thinking, oh, that male character has an excuse for doing something stupid or bad because he's a male, whereas females do not have that excuse and they should know better. And I feel like that's a societal thing that kind of creeps up on us all, like even women, I feel like. Because we are taught from an early age to see men as flawed and that they do make mistakes and to forgive them for those mistakes. Like, as one of the other commenters said, I forget who, I'm so sorry, most of the books that we read in school are male-led. In fact, I mean, we did read, when I was in sixth form, we did read some Angela Carter, which was great. But, yeah, a lot of the books we did read were male-led books, and a lot of the popular books are male-led. So we're taught to see men as flawed and vulnerable, and we sort of understand that, but because we're not exposed to those flawed women and those vulnerable women and those women that struggle with right and wrong, I feel like women are expected to be better in a way. Like, there's this really sexist idea in society in general that, you know, think about the adverts we watch on TV where you've got like useless dads who don't know how to do the washing and look after the kids. Mum has to go and get the washing up liquid or whatever. It's this weird cultural thing that is really harmful to everyone, actually. Sorry guys, my camera just died. I don't know why it keeps doing that or why the lights changed. Actually, I do know why the lights changed. It's got darker. I've been making this for ages. But what I was saying is there's that sexist idea, isn't there, that, you know, oh, men will mess up, bless them, and that's so sexist, I hate that. And so you have the flip side of that, is that the women are supposed to be perfect. So, like, for example, you have a female character who makes a mistake, like, say she's a bad mother, like, have you seen, like, if a female character is a bad mother, she is absolutely, like, despised, because she's gone against what women are supposed to be. Like, women are supposed to look after their children, and she's not looking after her children right, she's an evil character. Whereas so often in fiction you'll have like main characters, like loved characters, who are pretty bad dads in certain ways, but they're let off because they're men and, you know, that's dads. But female characters are sometimes judged more harshly in society, and I think a lot of us subconsciously do that, like when we're watching TV. I think it's a societal thing. I think I'm only going to read a couple more out, guys, because my camera did die and I feel like it's a warning from the universe to say that you need to stop this video soon because it's going on too long. So let's read a comment from Smoothie Bomb with a picture of Castiel. I just sat down and thought about all my favourite shows and my favourite characters within them, and it's true, most of the time I identify or sympathise with the men more than the women. I truly do think it's the fault of poor writing. I feel like female characters are almost always whittled down to a few defining characteristics instead of that whole person. Also, people tend to be so harsh towards female characters. Literally, if they have something they're good at or something that makes them special, men everywhere, and women alike, cry Mary Sue, ignoring the fact that most of the time the storyline in a TV show caters itself completely to the growth or personal arc of its male characters. Yes, Smoothie Bomb, I completely agree. Thank you so much for articulating that in a way that I could not. That's so true. I read an interesting description of Batman as a Mary Sue before. Like, there was like a list of male, like, pop culture characters that are really loved, and how they share the same traits that female characters who are called Mary Sues have. Like, they can do anything. Like, think about Rey from Star Wars. Like, she's got called a Mary Sue after Star Wars because she's so good at everything, and like suddenly she can use a lightsaber, and like, how did she get so good at everything? It doesn't make any sense. She's a Mary Sue. They're just forcing a feminist agenda. But actually it's more realistic than Luke's arc in like the first Star Wars films. Like, in the originals, like, Luke is just a farm kid. He's just a farm kid who gets thrust into this life, And bless him, I love Luke Skywalker, but he's technically more of a Mary Sue than Rey, because at least, you know, Rey has been fending for herself, she's been taking parts of ships apart, so it would make sense as to why she can fight, and why she can, like, why she's good at flying different ships. It would make sense that she knows languages, because she lives in a place where different people come and trade. Like, she's less of a Mary Sue than Luke is, but people just think, they assume just because she's a female character that she has to be a Mary Sue, when actually they don't really put the same level of, like, criticism or critique on the male characters. Anna Christensen says, sometimes with female characters, I notice they are written as female just to be like, hey, look, I'm a female, see, like me, and look, this book is a feminist book, look, and the character doesn't really come across as real, and it's unrelatable. Same with movies. Yeah, I have a problem with this, and I feel like a lot of, like TV companies and stuff like that they have the wrong idea. Like, they know feminism is a thing, and they know that, like, women want to be well represented, but like I said before, like, they get the wrong idea, and they think that means, oh, the women have to be perfect and all powerful and amazing, and it's just cringy and embarrassing. Like, that's not what we want. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants, like, these forced feminist, like, characters that can do everything, and, like, nobody wants that. You want flawed, realistic women that are strong characters, not because they're necessarily physically strong, but because they're realistic. Like, that's what you want of all characters, right? That's what most of us want. But so many, like, of the television companies and writers just have not got that memo yet, and I don't understand why. And it also means you'll get these creators, and it's like a total mess, because they'll be like, oh, I'm such a feminist male writer. Like, I'm going to use a male writer here, because I'm thinking of two in particular who are male writers. And they'll be like, oh, I'm such a feminist, look at my badass female characters. And then actual feminists, like actual women, will be like, oh, actually, those characters are sexist as hell. And then they'll be like, what, you're the misogynist? Because I wrote this feminist character. And it's like, oh god, a feminist character. A feminist character means nothing. Like, take that out of it. Like, just assume that, like, writers in the future should just be sat down, especially male writers, although not exclusively, and just said, look, write your people like people. Okay, like, if you're going to write female characters, and I encourage them to do so, like, we need more female characters and things, like, write them like people. They have thoughts and feelings like men, and they have flaws like men, and they can be unlikable. You can write, like, awful female characters that are really mean and nasty. That's not unfeminist. Like, it's unfeminist not to treat your female characters like people. Okay, so the last comment I'm going to read is Sophia H, and Sophia says, honestly, I think male characters are just better written and given more depth, as men have almost always been the main characters in the past. Maybe we've just been conditioned into preferring them. That could be true. That could well be true. We could just be used to male characters, used to their flaws, used to accepting that, maybe not critiquing it so much, but because there have been so few female characters, now they're adding more female characters in, there's so much more scrutiny on them. Like, everyone's watching and wondering, like, people feel like female characters are being shoehorned into stuff, and I don't agree with that. Like, I feel like representation is really good, like, most of the time. Like, there'll be some instances where you don't need female characters, like if it's a male-dominated film, which, you know, that's the point of it or something. But in some instances, like, there's no reason why you shouldn't have female characters. But now these female characters are being put in, so many people think it's for political correctness or feminism or whatever, and then the people at the top are panicking because they know there's all this scrutiny on them, and then their female characters become weirdly, like, stereotypical or weirdly amazing. None of it seems real. Everyone is annoyed. And I think that we are so conditioned into it. I think you're right, that we just completely don't notice when the same thing happens with male characters. Like, we just don't tend to notice these things. So many times I'll watch a film, like an action film, and I'll sit there and I'll be like, oh, there's one female character in it, and, you know, she was written in a really bad way. And then I'll think about it later and I'll be like, wait, actually, like, so were most of the male characters, actually. So sometimes I think we do just, like, hone in on it more, or we're more conditioned to accepting that with male characters in a way. Okay, so I'm going to end the video now. Thank you so much to everyone who's watched. It's so hot in here because it's like a heat wave, and I've got my light on. I got a new light, friends. It works, this one. Yeah, sorry about the light changing constantly. I'm so sorry if I didn't read your comment out. There have been so many really good ones in the comment section. I've just scrolled through. I didn't pick the ones which were necessarily the best, although they were all fantastic. So yeah, I'm sorry if I haven't answered your question, and yeah, let me know what you think in the comments to this video, and maybe I'll reply. I'll definitely read them. Okay, I love you loads, and I'll see you really soon. Thanks for doing this with me. It's been really good. Okay, I love you loads, and I'll see you really soon. Bye!